Today's guest is Philip Young, a solicitor, legal entrepreneur, and now co-founder of Garfield AI. Co-founding your own firm. Did it change your perspective on the legal industry? Were you looking at things differently from that sort of perspective of being a co-founder?
When I was at Baker's, towards the end of my time at Baker's, I found that I was turning away really good, interesting cases. A couple of weeks ago, the FT discovered us, and everything since then has been history. If you are looking for the sort of people that will make a partner in due course, they tend to be.
Hello and welcome again to Becoming a Lawyer. Today's guest is Philip Young, a solicitor, legal entrepreneur, and now co-founder of Garfield AI. Philip is someone who needs no introductions, but I'm still going to carry on. So just for the few that may not know him, he founded Garfield AI, the first AI-driven law firm to be approved by the SRA. Philip began his career at Baker McKenzie, co-founded one of the UK's top litigation boutiques, CYK, and is now at the forefront of innovation in legal tech. He's someone who's redefined what a legal career can look like, from courtroom strategy to now coding strategy. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. And that's very generous of you and probably not deserved at all on my part, but I'm very grateful to you for that kind introduction.
No, thank you for joining us. We're going to learn lots and we're going to pick your brains on a range of topics. So to start things off, can you just give us a quick snapshot of your journey from lawyer to legal tech entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. So I trained at a shipping insurance law firm in London in the late 90s that doesn't exist anymore. It merged into a different firm. I joined Baker McKenzie on qualification, and I was there in London and for a year in Hong Kong for about 8 years in total. I then left Baker McKenzie because I wanted to do something slightly different and ended up co-founding a specialist boutique litigation arbitration law firm in London called CYK. Cook, Young and Keedon is its full name. And then having spent 13 years there and having grown it from 3 people to about 40 people in total, 45 people, I then retired in the sense of partnership law, not in the sense of age, and decided to see the world because it was post-COVID. And then began Garfield with my new co-founder, Dan, and been working on that for 2 years. And obviously, it was all going very nicely and under the radar up to about 3 weeks ago when the FT outed us to the press. And so since then, it's been a lot more sort of high profile. So that's a quick snapshot of me.
Yeah, can we call you a celebrity now since you had your name and face plastered absolutely everywhere?
Yeah, I wasn't very keen on that. I'm like a lot of lawyers in that I would prefer to sort of remain relatively understated, and to find that all of this interest suddenly descended on me was... it's been a bit of a shock to the system. It's very, very kind of people to be so interested, and I hope I'm doing the best I can to answer people's questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And what initially drew you to a career in law? Was it uni? Was it friends? What was it that called you to practicing in law?
So I first became interested in becoming a solicitor at secondary school, and I went to a state comprehensive in a little town called Bakewell in the Peak District, which is well known for Bakewell puddings, not Bakewell tarts like Mr. Kipling sells. They're something completely different and inauthentic, Bakewell puddings. And while I was there, I began to become interested in the law. And one of my family's friends was a guy called John Gaunt, who had a very good licensing practice in Sheffield. And he was kind enough to take me as a sort of young GCSE student to some of the hearings he did in front of Sheffield magistrates. And it seemed like a very interesting job. And also what I noticed was that, and this was sort of the late 1980s when there was a recession, I noticed that lawyers never seemed to be out of work. Whatever the turn of the economic cycle, they always seemed to be kept gainfully employed. And so that was an interesting thing at the time when a lot of people seemed to be losing their jobs. And I think most fundamentally, like many people, I joined the legal profession because I think a lot of lawyers, we're basically healers and fixers by inclination. We like to solve things, solve other people's problems. And that's always been a sort of innate driver for me. And so as a consequence, I sort of progressed through. I went to university and read law, and then I applied for a training contract, and then due course I qualified. Looking back, the one change that I would not have predicted to my career as a practicing lawyer was that I've also been a giant nerd for a very long time, which is, you'll be able to spot a theme emerging here at Garfield. And I expected when I was at university to sort of do something in technology and law, i.e., I don't know, maybe IP law or IT law or something like that. And in fact, I became a commercial litigator, and that's because of my training contract, because of what I enjoyed most in my 4 seats.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right about with lawyers, they're always fixing things and they're always solving problems. And especially with this stuff with AI that's going on, a lot of lawyers are still looking at ways on how we can use AI to increase access to justice, which would help a lot of people and solve a lot of issues that we're facing right now. So I do agree with you on that point where lawyers are definitely good at fixing things and helping people along throughout their lives on various issues they face. Definitely in litigation where it's dispute resolution.
Yeah, definitely. And I think transactional lawyers as well, but it's a sort of different sort of fixing and healing. Often you find transactional lawyers think they're a lot more constructive than contentious lawyers. I've always argued about that with my transactional friends, but I can see the sort of point they're making, even though I don't agree with it. But I think they too are sort of healers and fixers by nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in that environment, the problems might be there might be less like human to human, but there's definitely still problems there, and there's issues that you're still fixing and sort of putting pieces together.
Mm.
And it's just different environments, but at the end of the day, you're coming up with these solutions to various problems. For example, corporates or people that might need help in private client matters, but they're all issues that need sorting out.
Exactly. Yeah, people come to lawyers for help, and so for I don't know, a transactional M&A lawyer, they've come to the lawyer because they want to sell a business or buy a business and or shares or whatever, and they need the lawyer to enable that. And the same with, I don't know, a real property transaction. If you want to buy a house, you want somebody to help you buy the house, the expert, and that person will probably become a real property lawyer because they enjoy doing real property transactions and helping people buy commercial and residential property.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you remember most about your time training and qualifying as a solicitor? So your early sort of years in the field.
So I went to a shipping and insurance law firm that was primarily contentious. And that was a big challenge because what I knew about shipping could be written on the back of a very small stamp. And I spent most of my first seat, if you pardon the metaphor, totally at sea, because I knew nothing about ship. I literally knew nothing about shipping law. And I sort of crash read a bunch of books on what's both called wet shipping and dry shipping. The joke is always that wet shipping is anything that falls off the side of a ship into water, and dry shipping is anything that falls off the side of a ship onto land, onto a port. That's a bit inexact, but that's a joke. I didn't understand any of either of those worlds. So I was completely lost in my first seat, and I did the best I could, but I was probably a hopeless trainee. Then in my second seat, I had the good fortune to be mentored by Ben Larkin, who's now a very senior partner at Jones Day. And that was an insolvency seat. And Ben, he was a litigator by I think mostly a litigator, then more of a transactional lawyer now. But he very much sort of took me under his wing. And I think that's really important for young lawyers to have a mentor at an early stage who just looks after you and points you the right way and tries to sort of deal with any anxieties you might have, and gave me a lot of responsibility. And I think that's a very important thing for a young lawyer too, to be given clients and little matters to run and to basically be said, get on with it and come to see me if you've got a problem. And that was really transformative for me because I went from the first seat where I was, what the heck is this, to a second seat where I began to realize I could do the job that was required. And from that point on, things got a lot easier because the third seat was an insurance litigation seat, and I understood insurance law to a decent extent, and I understood litigation, so I was able to did quite a lot in that seat. And the fourth seat was transactional corporate. And again, I was hopeless because I had no idea about M&A deals, but I did the best I could. But everyone knows, I mean, I'm getting a little bit long in the tooth now, but in my day, and I imagine it's still the case, the fourth seat is not the seat that trainees are expecting to qualify into normally. And so it's sort of the thing you do at the end of your training contract is a sort of interesting thing to do, but not fundamental to your career. So I was more sort of interested in the litigation seats and second and third seats.
Yeah, and is there anything specific? So, for example, there might be a solicitor apprentice that's watching this now, or a trainee solicitor going through different seats. Is there any piece of advice you'd give to them or your younger self when you were going through that period?
Definitely find a mentor if you can. And that's somebody that you click with, and somebody who is good at teaching and is willing to give you responsibility. That is really valuable. I think as well, I've always said, and this is going to continue to be the case for an AI-driven future, try to really understand the area you'd like to qualify into. And I've got thoughts on that, but I mean, try to understand it from a technical level. So you cannot start too early in trying to understand the relevant law, and if it's a contentious seat, the relevant procedure that applies to that area, because those are sort of bedrock skills. The other point I was about to make was when you're thinking about qualification, be driven by something that you really are going to enjoy, because you might be qualifying into an area and you might then be stuck in that area for the rest of your career, because it's quite difficult later to switch fields, particularly if the fields are wildly different. So I know going from a transactional field to a contentious field, in most firms that I'm aware of, that's really tricky. And therefore you want to pick something that you know you're going to enjoy for a long time. And I've known friends of mine, peers of mine, who have they qualified the same time I did into seats that the areas they didn't really enjoy, but they were offered a job and they decided just to take it. And they've not been as happy as they should have been through their career thereafter, because they've not been doing something that fulfills them as much as they could have been fulfilled. Obviously, I have to make the point that salary is also important. So there's a bit of a balancing thing to be done there. I still think you've got to sort of ultimately choose something that you know you're going to really enjoy, because if you really enjoy something, you're going to excel at it, because you're going to put 110% in, and that's going to be your path to a really successful career.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes, as speaking from a junior lawyer perspective, it's really hard to make that decision that I want to go into X field and I'm going to do this for X amount of years, for a couple of decades or whatever. Because prior to that, we were at uni, there was no sort of certain choices we had to make. Yeah, we picked optional modules and stuff like that, but you could always get them changed. And I think once you come out of uni, you're out of that protected bubble and you're in a professional working environment now, and you need to make decisions that are going to have impacts for a longer period of time. That's not to say you can still change. Whilst you're going through your training contract, you do different seats, you experience different things. But I guess what Philip is trying to say is you need to make sure you're reflecting on what you're doing, taking in the work that you are doing. Are you enjoying it? How does it make you feel? Does it align with your morals? And all these questions, just making sure you're asking yourself them. And it comes back to that point of having a mentor, because it's more than just technical skills that you need to develop. It's also that sort of guidance that you might need, or sometimes someone that does have that bunch of experience, they're able to sort of navigate and point you in that right direction, or ask you questions you'd never have thought of asking yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I agree entirely with that. So you can reinvent yourself during your career, and goodness knows I've done it a couple of times, but it becomes harder the more senior you get. You still need to pick something you're going to do for a number of years that's going to be true to yourself. That's a key point. I also think that lawyers, one of the strengths of the English training system for lawyers is that we give people a wide range of experiences early. And most people tend to be either transactional by inclination or contentious by inclination. And it's quite important to be true to that. I think we actually do a very good job in the country overall. I mean, for example, the American lawyers I've spoken to over the years, their system is wildly different. They don't have training contracts. They often go into a firm, qualify in a field, and that's it. They don't get any experience of other departments, even in a lot of American law firms. And that's even riskier, because, of course, then you could accept a job, go to a firm and find yourself doing work you just simply don't enjoy at all. And then you have to change firms, which is much more difficult than in England, where you flip around different departments in a firm.
Okay, I didn't. That's quite interesting. So in these American firms, I guess that can be more challenging for junior lawyers, because you're on that one-sided sort of path. But the positive to that is, I guess, if you do enjoy that, you're sort of set where you've
exactly.
got that defined sort of career path. So it has its positives and negatives, I guess.
Yeah, I think on the whole, training contracts are the better system than just going in and doing a job. I think if there was going to be a debate around it, it would be, is it best to have a 4-seat system over 2 years or a 6-seat system over 2 years? And I also like the idea of apprenticeships. I think that's another word for exactly the same sort of concept, which is sort of the opportunity to try many different things and find what you're good at and what you really enjoy. And that should be your aim. What are you good at? What do you enjoy?
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on to, well, not moving on to, because we were talking about it, your time at Baker McKenzie, just diving a bit deeper into that. What was it like working at Baker McKenzie, in the sense that you're working in a massive firm? What was the environment like? Was it a completely different experience to being in uni, surrounded by maybe friends here and there, or were there similarities between being at uni and in that sort of culture and environment at a massive law firm, where you would have had people from diverse backgrounds similar to your experience at uni?
Yeah, well, obviously it was a big global law firm, so it has a sort of corporate feel to it that university is completely different to. Because my years at university at Durham were it was a very relaxed environment. You know, there wasn't an awful lot of pressure. As long as you went to the lectures and went to the tutorials, you were good. And if you went to the pub the rest of the time, no one would have cared. Whereas, of course, that's
Yeah.
not the case at a law firm. Baker's, when I was there, was and still is an excellent law firm. And one of the things I always really admired about Baker's during my time was it had it had a good balance between seeking excellence, but at the same time having a really good atmosphere in the dispute resolution department. All the partners were really good people. They were great lawyers. They were keen to teach people, and they did really good work. And everyone had a real team ethos. So I was an associate there. All the associates stuck together, and many of the associates have gone on to incredible things. When I look at my peer group, they're all partners of other law firms now. Some are founders of law firms. Some are general counsel of huge global companies. They've all done brilliantly for themselves. And so they were obviously also really good at recruiting while I was there. Another benefit of it was that although it was a global law firm, the dispute resolution department, which was about the size of, I think it's about sort of 10 partners, maybe 30 to 40 associates, was still big, but it wasn't huge by the standards of some London law firms. So it still had a lot of flexibility. And as a department, they didn't try and silo you. So everyone could do arbitration work, everyone could do litigation work. And I think that's really important for young lawyers. I think if you get siloed too early, you lose the ability to gain skills, because there are things you learn from arbitration you can then apply to litigation and vice versa. And there are things you learn by doing different areas of law that you can apply to other areas of law. So I would have hated to have gone and done, I don't know, just facultative reinsurance disputes for the whole of my career. That would have driven me mad, or any other sort of particular type of claim over and over again. Whereas Baker's was very generalist, so he didn't do that. And that was very much an ethos we took to CYK as well, the importance of being a generalist and giving junior lawyers a very wide range of experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is a really big firm, and it must have been a big step from uni, where you would have been surrounded by your friends and having a good time, and no sort of repercussions for not attending lectures, for example, or enjoying yourself and having a good time. So, what were the biggest lessons you took away from being at such a massive firm?
That's a good question. So I think quality was a really big lesson. So Baker's always taught that every piece of work you sent out should be as good as though it's your last piece of work. That doesn't mean that you have to try and get 100% every time, because you should also be commercial. And sometimes clients only want 90%, and that's all they want to pay for. And you've got to read that and make sure you deliver. But still, every piece of work is your calling card, and therefore you should always try and deliver your best that you can do. And that was a very good and important lesson, and one I've very much taken away from Baker's and applied for the rest of my career. Another thing that I tried to apply, though sometimes I've fallen short on, is the importance of always being extremely professional if I can do. I'm not going to say I've always managed that, because there's always lawyers who come across as a contentious lawyer who you wonder how they got in the profession and whether or not that they got the short end of the clever stick on the day they were born. But I do try most of the time to be professional. But Baker's was really good at saying, no adjectives in correspondence. Even if you're dealing with a Wally, try to sort of ignore that. Just try to focus on the substantive issues. And those are really good lessons to take away. And I also learned an awful lot about law internationally, because Baker's had this thing where you met lots of lawyers from other offices. There was always a big European disputes meeting that you would go to. On one occasion in Madrid, I'm not a football fan, and I therefore managed to walk through in the hotel lobby the entirety of one of Spain's top football teams, who were all standing there waiting for their bus to arrive, and I didn't know who they were. So I walked right past the bouncers who were guarding them, who obviously worked out that I had no idea who these guys were, so I wasn't a threat. And then I walked right through the middle of them, and I went to another room. And I think most other people were sort of, politely walking around them, knowing that these were sort of famous global superstars. And so you get experiences like that are really great.
I'm guessing you didn't get any pictures then.
No, I had no idea who they were. It was only afterwards, when I came back, that a bunch of my colleagues who were watching said, "Philip, what were you doing?" I don't know who they were. Real Madrid? I think they were probably Real Madrid. And I was like, okay, who are they?
I bet you still don't hear the end of that. That's crazy. Yeah, I'm not the biggest football fan, but I think if I saw Real Madrid sports stars, I would have realised. Yeah.
If they'd been tennis players, that'd have been what different. I would have recognised them instantly. But football is a game I used to play, but it's not something I follow.
Yeah, and so if a junior lawyer is at a large firm today, what advice would you give them for them to have a smooth transition in those years they are there?
I would. So, I mean, we've touched upon bits of this already. I would definitely encourage them when they're thinking about their junior years to get the widest possible experience they can do, and to start thinking at an early stage, but without committing themselves to anything as to the areas they might want to specialize in. Because in every field there are particular niches, and it's important to think about things like that. It's not to say you can't change, and in fact, if you find you don't enjoy something, you should change when you're in a particular area. But it helps to begin to think early on. Where could I make a practice for myself? Where could I do work that is going to make me stand out? And if you want to get to part, that's the sort of thing you need to do. And also, what sort of clients do I need to look for? How might I find those clients to work for and impress? Those are good questions to ask. Gaps in your knowledge. If you think there are things you need to learn, then it's good to try to identify those and try to make sure that they are being addressed in some way. Another thing is to sort of try to understand in the big firms the power dynamics, because unfortunately in the big firms, unlike the small firms, there's always a bit of politics. And it's important to try and understand that at an early stage so you don't sort of fall foul of it. So if some partners like other partners and they don't like some partners, it's just important to navigate your way around that. So while I was in Hong Kong with Baker, Hong Kong I found was a much more political office than London. And one of the partners I worked for, he was a lovely bloke, and he looked a bit like a giant teddy bear, which was part of the reason I always thought he was a lovely bloke. But some of the other partners, for reasons I never understood, just didn't like him. And they were all supposed to be working on the same case, but it was awfully awkward as an associate because you had some partners who were saying, don't talk to this other partner. And that puts you in a very unfair and difficult position. So I had to sort of navigate my way around all that. So those are the sorts of things you have to be sort of astute to and be careful about.
Sorry, on that point, what tips and tricks would you have for someone who is in those sort of situations where there is a lot of politics? Because I can see this being an issue maybe in the bigger firms rather than the more small and niche firms.
Yeah, I think it is a big firm thing more generally. Certainly it has been in my experience. So I think one thing to do is to just keep your ear closely to the ground. So younger lawyers tend to hang out socially with each other after, the end of a week and things like that, at least for a while. At least they did in my day. It's always good to sort of listen to the more senior lawyers, to listen to what sort of comments they make and sort of try to understand the terrain that you're navigating. And also try to understand some of the motivations for why there's particular issues in relationships amongst partners, because that will help you understand whether you're about to do something that no one cares less about or actually might cause some sort of ridiculous reaction that shouldn't happen but otherwise would. You do find, unfortunately, that some lawyers are quite interesting characters, and that's something sometimes you've got to navigate. So some lawyers are somewhere on the spectrum, should we say, and it's that creates problems that you don't need in your working career, but you do have to try and deal with.
Yeah, and I think junior lawyers need to look back at being at uni, and then how you identify what type of people you can hang around with and what type of people you can't, and you start picking up those things. I think those are things we're fortunate enough to have developed at uni, and things that we can maybe bring with us.
Yeah, they're useful skills. They're really useful skills. Another thing to be really good at is to learn how to say no politely, because a lot of junior lawyers are very eager and they'll say, I can do this, I can do that. And then they can overload themselves, and that's no value to them or no value to anyone else. So it's always good to be able to say, no, I'm really sorry, I'm stretched as things are, but I could help you in 3 weeks' time or something if there's something then. And, if you can do that, you will save yourself a lot of angst. And also you're also helping the people who are asking you to do work, because if you can't actually do it, you're giving them a misleading impression as to delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes back to a point you mentioned earlier on about quality, and it was alongside when you were talking about professionalism. It's about quality of work, and if you're sort of over promising, you're gonna jeopardize that quality of work that you produce. So it's not always a good idea to say yes to everything.
Yeah, exactly. But never overpromise. If you can do, underpromise and overdeliver. That's the right way around.
Okay, there you go. But and moving on to CYK, where you were one of the co-founders. So what motivated you to co-found CYK, and how did you go from that transition of working for someone and at a law firm to now co-founding?
So a big global law firm has many strengths, and they're awesome places to work. But they also have weaknesses. Every firm does have different strengths and weaknesses. It's inevitable. And a weakness of a big global law firm is conflicts of interest. So when I was at Baker's, towards the end of my time at Baker's, I found that I was turning away really good, interesting cases because either there was an ethical conflict, which could be something ridiculous, like, I don't know, somebody in the Kuala Lumpur office had done $1,000 of work for the other side, and therefore we couldn't take the case against them. Or there would be a commercial conflict because big law firms are quite careful about who they will act adversely to. And some institutions are just a no-no, like giant banks, the big four accountancy firms, stuff like that. And I found that a little frustrating. And there were cases that I thought were really interesting that I wanted to work on that I couldn't accept. And also, frankly, I was beginning to feel after 8 years that I needed a new challenge. I could have stayed at Baker's and done the partnership thing, but I sort of felt that wasn't really me. I'm a little bit eccentric, some of my more recent career choices. So I decided to depart, and I then co-founded with a partner at Baker McKenzie who'd retired, Gerald Cook, and another colleague who wasn't at Baker McKenzie. He was at Adolf and Simmons, from memory, Mark Keedon. We co-founded CYK. And those were in the days when boutique litigation law firms were not really a thing in London. They were definitely a thing in New York, but not really a thing in London. And we thought we would try to do work that the big firms refused to handle, but obviously we could. And our timing was accidentally brilliant because we founded it not long after Lehman collapsed. And that meant there was an awful lot of work against the big banks that no one wanted to touch other than the likes of us. And frankly, if it hadn't been for us, it wouldn't have been serviced because people didn't have the ability to bring those sorts of claims. You needed city lawyers who'd either defended banks like I'd done or who brought the occasional claim against them to be able to pursue that sort of case. So that was very, very advantageous for us. In terms of the transition, I don't really feel I felt much about that because by the point I was leaving Baker's, I was a senior associate and I was largely running cases by myself anyway. And I think if you've chosen the right business partners, you know you can go and talk to them about anything that's causing you concern anyway. The door's always open, you've got to sort of support each other. It felt like, oh my God, what have I done? There was a few issues the first week, but the telephones didn't work properly, and that was quite frustrating. But we soon fixed that. No, so I think for me, it sort of felt like a sort of seamless transition, and yeah, that was the beginning of the CYK journey.
And it must have been nice to have co-founders, and that too, that were very experienced. So it must have given you a lot of confidence to make that leap of faith. And also yourself, being a senior associate, it's not an easy feat to get to that position. So you would have had a lot of self-confidence, and you weren't that junior lawyer anymore. You were well into your career. You had a lot of confidence. You had your own cases. You've also done it at a big firm where it would have been very competitive to get to that position. So it makes it a lot easier. I don't want to say a lot easier because it's still really difficult to leave that position and say, I want to go off on my own, because you would have had a fairly comfortable life at Baker, and then you went and took that leap and co-founded CYK, and it seems like you've done some really interesting work with the Lehman Brothers collapse and all that stuff that happened. So yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. My parents at the time were basically, "What the heck have you done, Philip? This is mad. You're at Baker's. It's career for life. You never have to worry about anything again." And I was like, "Yeah, but you've got to sometimes in your life, you need a new challenge, and you've got to grow." Because throughout our life, we've got to grow and change. That's how humans operate. Otherwise, we stagnate and become miserable. And that was, for me, a time when I obviously felt that sort of impetus. And I felt by that point that I'd proven to myself that I could do the work I wanted to do over 8 years of doing complex litigation. And so I backed myself and believed in myself. And also clients went with me with Baker's blessing. And so I sort of felt like I wasn't taking as much of a risk as it might have appeared to my parents and other people. And as it transpired, it went okay. Obviously, if it had gone badly, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you now. So it's sort of a sort of silent evidence point anyway, in that probably many people tried this and it didn't work, and I was just fortunate.
It speaks for itself what you've done there, going from Baker and CYK. So co-founding your own firm, did it change your perspective on the legal industry? Were you looking at things differently from that sort of perspective of being a co-founder?
When you're an owner of a business, you have a very different perspective than when you're an employee. That's very much the case. And sometimes as an owner, you wish your employees would see things a bit more like an owner. And actually, if you are looking for the sort of people that will make partner in due course, they tend to be the people that see the business as though they're an owner from an early stage in their career. And it's quite difficult to sort of describe that. It's quite subtle. But people who sort of see the business as being their long-term life, and they want to grow the business and they want to help their colleagues, and they don't sort of make unreasonable demands of the owners, though, sensible demands rather than silly demands. They're the people that tend to be the keepers, I think, in most law firms. I think what was interesting was that we went from a firm that everyone knows to a firm no one knows. And it was interesting to see the institutional arrogance of some other law firms, because in some of the big claims we acted on before anyone knew who we were, we got some very arrogant sort of pre-action responses to correspondence and things. And often it was really silly and counterproductive because, I won't name the names of the firms because I don't want to embarrass them, but they basically damaged their client's position in the positions they adopted, and gave us, basically, it's like playing chess against somebody that gives you free pieces. It was fantastic. If someone's going to give me an unfair advantage in litigation, I'm going to accept it. That's my duty on behalf of my client. And it was interesting watching as that changed when they began to sort of lose hearings and realize that actually this is not some firm of jokers. They'd actually look at the firm and look at the pedigree of the people there and think, actually, we're dealing with city lawyers with a new name above the door. And then some of the easy wins went away. Then we were back into proper litigation again, where they weren't just handing out errors that you were able to collect. It was also interesting seeing the reaction of some of the institutions on the other side. So again, I won't name any names, but there were a couple of banks who didn't like being sued in London effectively for the first time in decades and losing cases rather than just getting rid of them cheaply. And there were attempts to try to kibosh us, which ultimately worked. But it was interesting seeing the attempts. And I now have a much more cynical view about why people like big banks run big panels. I used to think it was that they were just trying to spread the work around. But now I think definitely there is an intention in that to try and conflict out as many firms as possible. But that I think they've largely given up on because there's enough litigation boutiques now that they can't possibly conflict out all the firms.
Yeah.
And there was also a thing with the court. So the commercial court, after Lehman went under, was still populated with judges who thought the investment bankers were honest, great people. And that position changed over about 5 years of quite a lot of litigation brought by us and brought by Quinn Emanuel and a few others. And now I think you'd struggle to find a judge who would have that view.
Just diving a bit deeper on that point of thinking like an owner of the firm, how can junior lawyers think like owners? Is it commercial awareness, or is it understanding what the client wants and how they attract business, or is it more than that?
I think it's all of those things. So, I'm really talking about people who are thinking about where they're working and thinking at some point, I might like to be a part owner of this business, i.e. a partner in some shape or form. Not all law firms, of course, use the phrase partner anymore, but it's the same conceptual point. And so that means things like thinking about how to develop your own career and thinking about how to develop client relationships and the firm's business. Think about how to help other colleagues develop their careers and their practice areas, being sort of conscious of the demands upon the firm. So, for example, not sort of expecting the firm to be able to do things that if you're an owner of the firm, you just wouldn't regard as commercially sensible. One thing I've noticed, particularly in the last few years, is that politics has become a thing in law firms in the sense of external politics. And I noticed that, for example, the US president, who is a very, very unusual person, should we say, without sort of expressing a view, seems to have been causing American associates to sort of abandon their law firms. And I personally think that is performative and is not sort of the thing that in the long term is going to help your career, because other law firms will look at people like that and think these people seem to be putting their own political views above the needs of a firm. And I think that's risky. If someone wants to do it, brilliant. But they've got to bear in mind there might be a cost associated. So you've got to think of a business as a business. And that's what it's there to do. It's there to serve its clients and generate money and hopefully create enough money that everyone has a nice sum of money to pay their mortgages and all those sorts of things.
Thank you for that, Philip. Yeah, that's really valuable. And I just want to emphasize that point Philip makes there about thinking of law firms as still a business. It's still it's a business at the end of the day. Because I know when I was in uni, all I was thinking about is I want to go into law and I want to study law and I want to be good at law. So you think about it. And then when you get out, when you go into practice, you're at a law firm, you just want to get technically really good at a certain area. And I think early on it is really important to get really good at a certain area that you enjoy and making sure that you're building technical skills and understanding that the law in that area really well. But also, if you do want to progress those senior positions, understanding that it's a business. How is the money coming in? How's the money going out? How are we winning contracts? Things like that, I think junior lawyers can often overlook or are not told. Sometimes we need to be told that, it is a business, the commercial decisions need to be made. And I know you were also in litigation, and sometimes you're dealing with a case and there might be a really strong legal argument to make, but often you might find commercially it's just better in that situation to buy the case off cheap, to settle it cheaper, even though you might have the best legal argument in the world. But is it a risk that you want to take?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's a really good point. Another point I'd make is, and this applies more to smaller firms and bigger firms, but as you progress through your career, you will want budgets to do things. You'll definitely want budgets to do marketing, stuff like that. And then you've got to think commercially about that. You've got to say to yourself, where is this money best spent? What is the best return on this capital for me? Where would I build my client base best? And so you would want then, when you go to whoever is your supervisor, to say, I want to spend part of this budget on doing X and part of it doing Y, to be able to justify all that as being, I know that this is going to return brilliant dividends because this is an area I'm really good at already, and I need to meet these people to be able to develop them as clients. What you don't want to do, and sometimes I've seen over my career, is when someone comes to you and says, oh, I want to spend X amount of money on something that is obviously going to be just wasteful. You've got to see that money, treat that money as though it's your own. Would you, if it was your money, would you spend it like that? And if you would, then it's going to be a good business case. If you wouldn't, don't do that.
Yeah.
Even little things like that are important.
Yeah, thank you for that, Philip. And I can't sum that up any better. That's just, it's really amazing advice and insights into how you can progress. And what Philip has said there, thinking of the money as your own and caring about it enough if you do want to progress in your careers. There are mentalities and approaches we need to adopt as junior lawyers. I can ask you questions all day about the CYK and Baker McKenzie and all that, but time is of the essence. So moving on to the next section, entering the legal tech world. So what inspired you to move into legal tech space after building a successful firm, having a successful career at Baker? You've already accomplished so much. I think many people in your position would have just settled down or just, thought, this is it now, I'm just going to take it easy. But then you jumped into the legal tech world. What happened there? So what made you take that leap?
I think there's a bit of a theme in my career of wanting to do something different from time to time. So, I mean, I left the firm I trained at, went to Baker's. And after 8 years, I left Baker's and founded CYK. And then after 13 years, I retired from CYK. So COVID was not my favorite period, like it wasn't for most people. And being stuck in your house for 2 years I found really quite aggravating. And I really wanted to see more of the world, particularly as I was conscious I wasn't getting any younger. So I decided that I should do that and retired, and then took my family on a 3-month road trip across America. And we went from Boston to Seattle with a giant detour around Colorado to do some skiing. And I can tell everyone who might be listening to this that if ever you have the chance to do a road trip across America, you should do it. It's amazing. The scenery in America is just incredible. It's just mind-blowing.
Where did you start and where did you end on your road trip?
So I started Boston and then ended in Seattle. We went, without going into too much detail, we went north from Boston into New England, and this was autumn in the fall. And throughout my entire life, people have been saying the fall in New England is just beautiful. And they were understating it. It is just gorgeous. It is staggering. Everyone should go and see autumn in New England. And then we went the upper part of New York State to Niagara Falls and all of that, for all of the sort of post-industrial towns up there. The bottom of the Great Lakes, past Cleveland to Chicago, then up into Minnesota, across the plains, the Black Hills of Dakota, which were also absolutely gorgeous. And then into Wyoming, and then round south through Colorado, and then back up north to Montana, and then across to Seattle. But while all that was going on, this was autumn 2022, ChatGPT 3.5 was released. And as I mentioned earlier, I am a giant nerd as well as a lawyer. I've always liked tech and computers. And so I had to play with it. I had time on my hands. And what I realized really quickly was that this technology is going to change law dramatically. And then I parked that thought because I was in America having too much fun. But then I returned to the thought in April, May 2023 when ChatGPT 4 was released, because that was clearly another quantum jump upwards in performance. And then I thought, well, we should build something to use this. It'd be fun and interesting and a good hobby. And at that point, that was all I was thinking. And I went out and found my co-founder, Dan. Dan's a lot younger than me. He's in his sort of late 20s. He's far cleverer than me. I call him a quantum physicist, but he likes to be very precise and say a quantum physicist by background, because he never finished his PhD because he dropped out of his PhD in photonics to go all in on Garfield. At some point, he'll probably return to do his PhD, but he sort of feels that until he's sort of got his doctorate, you can't call him a quantum physicist. But he's got a master's and undergrad from excellent universities, so I don't see the... Anyway, be that as it may. Yeah, so the problem I decided I wanted to solve was driven by my brother-in-law, Andy, who's a plumber who lives near Sheffield. What basically his problem is a problem all small business people have, in that he is sometimes owed money and debtors don't necessarily pay him. And it's not because there's any problem with their solvency or any problem with the quality of the service. It's just that they know small business people don't have the time to write lots of chasing letters and to pursue them, and then to fill in court forms and pursue a small claim. And it's intimidating to bring a small claim for a small business person. And they're certainly not going to use lawyers because that's wholly uneconomic. So as a good brother-in-law, I'd always step in and help him get paid, because the sort of money he was talking about, as I said elsewhere, for a city lawyer is nothing, but for a small business person, a few £1,000s is basically their summer holiday. I was conscious that this was a problem, and I thought AI was an ideal solution to it. And that's because, in the words of Dan's got this wonderful phrase. He describes a small claim as a succession of relatively closed problem spaces, which is sort of scientific speak I really like. But a closed problem space is an ideal problem for AI to solve, and a relatively closed problem space is a relatively ideal problem for AI to solve. And so we thought we'd be able to build something that would help with this. It went pretty quickly from being a hobby to being a serious thing, because it became pretty apparent to us quickly that we were going to be able to build something that really would be able to solve this. So then it became more serious, and we took in, I mean, I'd been self-funding it, but then we took in some external money and we grew the team to 5 of us. For a while, we were 6 of us. And then once we got to the point about summer last year where we had a very effective prototype, I informally showed it to some members of the senior judiciary to ask whether they would regard it as something the judiciary would welcome or dislike. Because obviously if the judiciary didn't want to use it, then we shouldn't pursue it. The reaction was very positive from the senior judiciary. So that meant I wasn't wasting my time. That was very good. And then I had a dialogue with the SRA over about 8 months about whether or not this thing could be authorised and regulated, because it would have to be authorised and regulated to be able to provide a service to businesses. And that process came to an end a few months ago. And thereafter, my plan was to do a quiet stealth launch and very slowly roll it out. But a couple of weeks ago, the FT discovered us, and everything since then has been history. Was not expecting to find myself in the press.
Yeah.
Was not certainly not of the magnitude I have been. And I keep jokingly saying to people, I'm probably we got the face for radio, and so I only apologise for the fact that people have to look at photos of me the whole time. But that's how we got here.
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how at the start of this podcast you spoke about that helping and healing perspective that lawyers have, and it's one of the things that drew you in, and how we're still seeing that in you when you came up with this idea of Garfield, with the issues your brother-in-law was having, and you sort of came up with Garfield AI, which in a way increased access to justice for people like your brother-in-law, and it stems from those sort of feelings you had early on in your career, or was it uni, that you had those thoughts of
My life, I think.
yeah, exactly, of problem solving and healing and stuff like that, and it's influencing a lot of things you're doing, and it's having a positive impact on yourself and the people around you, which is absolutely amazing to see. And it's so important that we make the right decisions, and we question ourselves and ask us what our beliefs are, and what purposes we want to have and what impacts we want to have. And in your example, it's also benefiting you in terms of career-wise and coming up with these innovative ideas like Garfield AI and CYK and your experiences at Baker. And I'm sure there's plenty of other things that we just don't have the time to talk about that have happened because of whatever you believe in. So that's absolutely amazing to see. So talking about Dan a little bit, how did you meet someone who's in a completely different industry? Was it your networking skills? Was it things that you learned at Baker or CYK that allowed you to network with someone like that?
Just quantum physicists and lawyers hang out together all the time. Yeah, I just found Dan by searching for somebody. because I knew that I have coding skills, but they're not professional coding skills. And actually, the guys in the team have been really kind to me, and a lot of my code has been gone into the product, but some of it has been professionalized, shall we say. What I wrote worked, but it wasn't a professional standard, a professional coder would write. Although I've really enjoyed doing all the coding, I've enjoyed that side of things as much as the other side of things. Yeah, but I found it by searching for him. I knew I needed a technical co-founder. I went and interviewed a bunch of people, and Dan was clearly the guy. We click. It works really well together. Although we're different in ages, we've got very different skills that complement each other. And I'd also like to say that the other members of the team, so our two front-end wizards are Pablo and Harry, and our other back-end wizard on top of Dan is James. They're brilliant guys, both as people and also in their professional work. They're just really impressive people. They're really good at getting things done. They're very creative. They've got a different set of skills to lawyers. I think they're a little bit less stressed than lawyers generally. So I think lawyers tend to be quite stressed and high strung. Probably that's because of the work we do and the pressures on us, rather than necessarily our personality type. But I think that's very much to their benefit. And I found working with them to be hugely enjoyable. It's been a different experience to working with lawyers, but it's been an awful lot of fun. And I've also enjoyed trying to understand a different generation's jokes, and also occasionally telling them my generation's jokes, which I think most of the time they humour me by sort of laughing at, but sometimes they do actually think they're funny. So that's great.
Yeah, that seems like a really good team and environment you've got yourself in, where you can also have a good time with them on a people basis, and also you're getting the work done. You've got the right skill set and team around you. So that's amazing. One question I really want to ask, I'm not sure how many people want to know the answer to it. The name Garfield AI, how did it come about?
Yeah, so this is just an in-joke that stuck. So for 25, maybe 26 years, I've had a friend called Garfield Smith, and he was at Baker's with me. He was a transactional technology lawyer in the tech department, whereas I was obviously a litigator in the dispute res department. Although we lost contact for many years because he left Baker's and I didn't keep up with where he was going. He went through a couple of firms in that time, as is often the case nowadays, because people don't stay at a firm until they drop dead anymore, like they did when I started in the profession. So for a long time, he's been jokingly saying, you should have been a technology lawyer, Philip. And I've, of course, been responding, well, you should have been a litigator, because, of course, I want to try and maintain the argument that litigation is better. Debatable, you got to do that. Anyway, when I started this, I had to accept that I was now a technology lawyer and he'd won. So as a joke, I said, okay, we're going to call it Garfield in your honor. And then we spent basically best part of a year trying to think of a better name, because it was a joke, and no one could think of a better name for this. And in fact, the more we thought about Garfield, the more we liked Garfield, because it even sounds like an English Welsh lawyer. So it sort of stuck. Garfield AI in honor of Garfield Smith, who's got a lovely boutique firm in London, and that's where we are. It's nothing to do with a cat. And I've been waiting for the cease and desist letter to come in from the Jim Davis estate or anything, but it's yet to arrive.
Yeah, I quite like the name, and I think like you say, I think a lot of people do like it, and it's one that's just stuck. It suits the platform quite nicely. Talking about Garfield AI itself and what it's offering, and you did touch upon that when you spoke about the issue you were aiming to solve. From a user's perspective, and I've been on the website myself, it's very, very user friendly. Was this your aim to make it as user friendly as possible? What were your goals when you did create the platform?
So we were building something that the Andes of this world can use. And that means that we have to try and make it as easy to use as possible. That very much influenced the design decisions. Also, it's fair to say that the team have also discussed all of this sort of thing. And my attitude would have been, and this is the wrong approach, I would have put buttons all over the place and things. I would have taken a sort of 747 cockpit approach to how you design the controls. Whereas all the guys said, no, that's old school. What we do nowadays, we take an Apple approach to things where there are no buttons unless we really have to have them. And we make it as intuitive as possible. Clearly right about that. And that's very much the design ethos behind the product. The idea ultimately is it's supposed to hold your hand through the whole process. What's been interesting is watching the reaction to it. So some people, when they join the platform, because they've got a genuine debt claim, because only people with genuine debt claims will be allowed on, they will just intuitively just drop a couple of invoices in and maybe a contract, and then Garfield will do its thing. Some people, I think, sometimes get sucked into the belief that they're dealing with an AI god. And then they'll drop loads of stuff into it and huge amounts of information that even I would be like, okay, I have to spend an hour thinking about all this. And keep thinking to myself, you see that's asking too much. This is a small debt claim platform for claims up to 10,000. It's not a claim. You can't bring intermediate track claims and stuff on this. It's beyond the scope of the technology at the moment. So it's been really interesting seeing the reaction, the fact that some people believe this technology is far more capable than it presently is, where some people just instinctively understand what it's designed to do, and off they go. Obviously, if you do try and put things onto it that it won't handle, it tells you that.
Yeah.
Like, just like going to a lawyer and saying, hi, you're an employment lawyer, but I need you to do this really interesting tax dispute. You're going to get a do not compute type response.
Yeah. And I'm sure as the tech develops and as you grow as a group, you'll be able to address more complicated problems. But as you said, when you started this off, it was one of the things Dan said is you need to solve that small sort of problem and address that, get really good at it, and then go from there. And I think it's a really good approach because it ties into that principle that you had of high quality work. And it's given that in a really small environment. And if you ask too much of it, it sort of becomes an almost chat GBT where it's very just, it'll be really good at answering generic questions, but is it giving you that specific service that you need? And it will be difficult to control that and what it's offering.
Exactly. It becomes a much more open problem space then.
Yeah.
And also, it's a route of how you solve a problem, regardless of whether it's a legal problem, engineering problem, anything else. You want to break it down into manageable chunks, and the bigger the problem, the more chunks and the harder that is. So far, the majority of everyone who's used it, they've just intuitively got it, and it's worked so well actually that we've been a bit perplexed by the fact that there hasn't been more sort of things go where people have raised questions or issues. But most people just seem to log on to it, look at it, give it a couple of invoices, a contract, and then they get a letter for action. They send a letter for action. They just seem to get it intuitively. Maybe it's because of the excellent videos that the team have prepared on the website. People watch the videos and go, I see how it works, and just follow that.
Yeah.
But I just assumed with a new product, people would sort of go, oh, how does this work? And start experimenting more than seems to be happening at the moment.
Yeah. And I think it is that a lot of credit is to that front end design of it, where it's just so user friendly. When you're on the website and you navigate through, it's just so simplified. And I'm sure there's a lot going on in the background, and there was a lot of planning and preparation. But when you look at it, you're just like, it seems like it's so easy to use. And you've said it yourself, where you've had a lot of people that have used it and found it so easy to use and sort out their debt issues that they're having. Focusing on law firms now, how can you see law firms working with Garfield rather than competing with it?
So one of the early design decisions I made was to ensure that Garfield was also available as a platform to law firms. And that's because when you've been in the profession a long time, you have a certain affection for the profession and you want the profession to thrive. What I wanted to do is I wanted to give law firms the option of using it too. And that's ultimately because it will help law firms. So if you're a firm and you want to do more small debt claims, your challenge is going to be how to scale at an appropriate cost, because you might have to take on more staff. That means more overheads like bigger offices and stuff. And then you need the volume to justify that. Whereas if you've got something like Garfield, you don't need necessarily to take on a lot more staff or have bigger offices. You can use the platform to help you scale effectively and maintain your margins. So I think from that perspective, it's a big win for law firms. And that's, I think, the reason why we've had quite a few law firms sort of sign up already and are using it, not just for their own small debts, but also for their clients. We've also taken the view that from the perspective of our ultimate users, we don't really mind if they come to us directly or a law firm uses us on their behalf. We're totally agnostic, whatever makes people happy.
Yeah.
And I quite like that as an approach. I think that should be the approach. There's always going to be people that would prefer a human overseen solution to an AI only solution. Yeah. I think as the technology progresses and there are products that are launched by people that can do bigger and more complicated matters, the likelihood of the clients wanting a human overseeing solution will be higher. And so we'll move to a world where lawyers will have an AI assistant, or maybe a collection of AI assistants that help them with different matters in different ways.
Yeah, and I think it ties into that AI agent sort of trend that we're seeing, with agents being really good at certain tasks and specific elements that can complement your core service. And yeah, and I agree with that point, where we'll see that integration of human and AI picking up on the areas that are more mundane and routine, that can be done far quicker and at a cheaper cost. That takes us quite nicely onto our next section, the future of law and where we're headed. Do you believe AI is going to replace certain roles or redefine them? And I know you touched upon this with that point of AI assisting lawyers.
Yeah, I think the world is going to change, but I'm not a doom and gloomer on this. I'm an optimist, and I'm naturally an optimist anyway. I think when you're a bit entrepreneurial, you're automatically optimistic as a personality type. What I think will happen is a lot of the frankly tedious grunt work that tends to be foisted upon junior lawyers and no one likes to do, and I remember I didn't like to do it as a junior lawyer, will end up being lifted from junior lawyers' shoulders, and junior lawyers will be given better, higher value tasks to do. So when I think back to, I'm not so old yet that I can't remember being a junior lawyer and a trainee, and it was big disclosure exercises, being trapped in a room looking through documents, due diligence exercises in M&A transactions, doc review, more doc review, more doc review. And in my day, a lot of time near the photocopier. Not exactly the glamorous end of the law, is it?
What's a photocopier, Philip?
What's a photocopy? Exactly. Yeah, yeah. When I started in the shipping insurance firm I was in, there was a lady on the sixth floor who was a telex operator. Now, I think the telex machine, most of your generation might have to Google to know what one of those was.
Genuinely got no idea what that is.
It was a sort of highly inferior form of long distance communication where you sent short messages with the word stop at the end a lot.
Oh, is that when you open the window and send a pigeon outside?
Yeah, that's even earlier. Smoke signals. Pigeons. I shouldn't joke about pigeons because my grandfather kept pigeons after the war. That was his hobby. He used to sort of go and
Nice.
release them, and they'd all fly home to him. It was amazing,
Cool.
amazing creatures, really interesting. But anyway, I won't. That's a digression. But what was I going to say? Yeah, so I think a lot of the grunt work that is high volume in terms of time but low quality will be taken away. And I think junior lawyers will find that they will be given better, higher level tasks to do. So more client relationship and client management, more strategic stuff, thinking about how to formulate a case, applying the law, those sorts of the sort of jobs that you go into the law to do. You don't go into the law to sit in a room and stare at lots of documents. And so I think that's the direction of travel. And of course, lawyers will be supported by AI assistants that will help them and also act as a sort of an informal mentor along the way if they can't talk to a more senior lawyer about things. If they want to bounce an idea off somebody, the AI will be there to do it. Some people have said that surely this means that there'll just be a lot less work around and there'll be a lot less need for lawyers. I hold the opposite view. I think there'll be more work around and therefore more need for lawyers. And obviously I come from this from a litigation perspective, not a transactional perspective. I can't speak to transactional stuff, but I can speak to litigation. The consequence, I think, of making a lot more cases economic, because they will become more economic because a lot of the time cost will go out of a claim, is that there'll be a lot more claims pursued. Inevitably, a lot more claims will be litigated. And if a lot more claims are litigated, that will more than compensate for the fact that a lot of the grunt work in the fewer number of claims is not needing to be done by humans anymore. And I think that holds strong implications. So, that would be a positive for junior lawyers, but it also has big implications for how the country funds its court service, because you need more judges and more available courts. And it has big implications for civilization because it means people are more likely going to be able to litigate when they know that they're going to be able to litigate. Maybe it might mean that organizations which are sort of thematically wrongdoers, and I'm just thinking of the post office now for some reason. I don't know why I'm thinking of them. Goodness knows, Horizon. Things like that. People, when they're in an organization and they're about to do wrongdoing over a wide canvas, they might stop and think a bit more and say, actually, this will see the light of day. It will be litigated. Should we even do this? Isn't it better to sort of be on the right side of the moral line? So I think there might be some very big implications long term for our civilization.
Yeah, and no, I agree with that. And also, I'd like to add, please do correct me if I've got the wrong end of the stick here, Philip. So, with more and more tech coming along and AI being integrated, especially from a litigation perspective, and talking about insurance contracts specifically, I guess there'll be more policy issues and coverage issues, whether, if there is a hiccup with, say, for example, AI is involved in this legal service delivery process, or whether it's an industry. Do the contracts cover that? There'll be more disputes and more work going around in that sense also.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you might have a coverage dispute over a claim for £100,000 and might think, I'm not going to litigate this. But then suddenly, if the cost of litigating it is not 50,000, it's 10,000. Suddenly you're thinking, well, it's worth it then because it's 10,000, not 50,000, and the other side's cost is going to be the same. The game becomes worth the candle. And that's why there'll be a lot more, I think, litigation around in the long term. The other implication for this is I think it will change the way law firms charge for their fees. So when I started, we were not long into billing by the hour. It's been going for about 30 years by that point. I think going back a long way in time, there was a lot more fixed fees, even in litigation. And I think we might be going full circle back to a world where law firms are going to be able to quote, certainly with greater certainty, fees for particular stages and maybe fees overall for a case. And if we get to that world, then the certainty also will drive more litigation. Because if you are a claimant and you're told, instead of being told how much is a piece of string, how long is a piece of string, when you ask how much it's going to cost me, to this will cost you this much money, and you can then make a decision whether you're going to proceed, suddenly you're more likely to decide to bring a case.
Yeah.
And a defendant is more likely to decide whether or not they're going to actually defend it, because they're going to know what they're in for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's going to be really interesting watching as things change.
Yeah, definitely. You know, we've got certain industries like, for example, conveyancing, where the work is standardized to some extent, and they are charging those fixed fees. And you can see how high volume and the way they operate, because they've got that pricing structure, and it's had a massive impact. So yeah, with AI and AI being able to take over more tasks and get more done at a lower cost, it might have that impact, like you say, on other firms and different practice areas within the legal industry. So yeah, thank you for that, Philip. Before we move on to the quick fire round, I just want to say it's been absolutely amazing. You've answered so many questions, and provided so much valuable advice and insights. So I just want to say thank you for that.
I hope some of it's of use, but people obviously have to form their own views as to how they want to accept or not accept my. The great thing about having opinions on things is that they're only ultimately your opinions, aren't they? But
yeah, definitely. And yeah, moving on to the quick fire rounds. This is going to be I've got 6 questions here, and I want you to try and answer them in a sentence or two. And first thing that comes to mind.
Go on then.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
So first question: most underrated skill for a junior lawyer?
Oh, humility. Weirdly enough, a lot of junior lawyers are often not quite as conscious of their lack of experience as they should be, and it's experience that really tells. And I remember when I was a junior lawyer, I could be sometimes a little bit too full of myself. Try and always dial that down a bit, because whatever you think you know, you don't know as much as a guy who's been doing it for 30 years or a lady who's been doing it for 30 years.
Yeah, and I guess tech and AI and all that stuff is kind of fueling that, where junior lawyers might get overconfident, and
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Also, this now applies to senior lawyers, because you can't be overconfident with new technology that you don't fully understand. You know, it's a different world.
Yes.
You've got to adapt to as an old lawyer.
Yeah, well, there you are. There's two sides.
Yeah.
Per coin. A legal tech trend you're most excited about?
Well, I have to say LLMs, don't I? I mean, obviously I would do, because I spent 2 years building something by reference to them, but I do think this technology is going to be utterly transformational, and it's the speed of advance is accelerating, not slowing down. If you'd asked me 3 years ago if I would be here now having built an AI product and regulated it, and it's an AI law firm, I'd have laughed at you and said that's science fiction and that's not going to happen in my lifetime. And if I said that 3 years ago and now we're here now, where are we going to be in 3 years' time? I literally don't know. It's really interesting. This is a great time to be alive. You know, there's been whole centuries where nothing progressed, and now we're in a century where things are progressing by the year.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. A book every lawyer should read.
Well, if you want a bit of comedy, Uncommon Law by AP Herbert is some of the stories in there are now historical and obsolete, but some are timeless and hilarious, like the story, what's it called? The Negotiable Cam, which is just a genius, funny story that lawyers laugh at when they read.
Okay. Email or phone call, which one do you prefer?
Oh, phone call, because I'm that generation. I mean, if you send me an email, that's fine, but I much prefer to talk to people.
Okay, and what's one myth about AI in law you'd like to bust?
Definitely the fear some people have that it's going to take away everyone's jobs and we're all going to be redundant, and Arnold Schwarzenegger like Terminator robots will destroy the planet. I am an optimist. I think it will be a positive. I think it will create jobs, if anything, jobs that we can't even predict now because we can't see the future. And I also am an optimist about human nature, and therefore I tend to think that dystopian sci-fi is unlikely to come true, because I don't think humans are quite that silly. I could be proven wrong, and if so, well, you can tell me in our nuclear waste bombed out country in 5 years' time, but I'm fairly sure everything's going to be okay.
Fingers crossed, yeah. And final question, one word to describe the future of legal practice.
Oh, exciting. No, it's a great time to be a lawyer, really interesting. I think lots of really good developments are coming. And if I was a young lawyer now, I'd be really excited to see what the next 20, 30 years holds. And it will be such a fascinating time to be a lawyer.
Yeah, definitely. And Again, massive thank you, Philip. I've really enjoyed this discussion and learned lots. And before I let you go, what's one key message you'd like to leave junior lawyers with to take away from your journey?
I think it's a continuation of what I just said, which is, be excited by all this. Not afraid. I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be good for you guys. And I just think you've just got to stay on the curve. So there's going to be more learning to be done because you will have to adapt as technology rapidly progresses. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And when you're young, things much easier when you become a bit more like a dinosaur like me. So go with the flow, enjoy it, and keep learning.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And for anyone that wants to reach out or connect with you, where can they follow you or learn more about Garfield AI?
So if you want to read more about Garfield, then www.garfield.law is your place to be. I am personally looking forward to being out of the spotlight because the media will move on, whereupon less people will try to contact me and I will go back to my day job of developing the product. But in the meantime, I no doubt will pop up here and there, and apologies in advance for having to see my face.
Well, there you have it. It's been an absolutely amazing episode with Philip Young, co-founder of Garfield AI. Thank you everyone for listening in, and that's all from us today.